What is going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Homebuilt Workshop. Today we're working on a guitar and I'm going to show you my process for polishing a guitar body to a nice mirror shine. Look at that. Stick around. It is finally time that I get this guitar body wet sanded and buffed so that I can move on and do the assembly and get this thing wrapped up. Now, I have done this same procedure on polyurethane. I've done it on lacquer. This is a water-based finish put out by Crystalac. This is their bright tone instrument finish. There's about 6 to 8 coats on here. I did sand in between coats. The surface is already pretty smooth, but there are a few little bits of dust and dirt in there. I don't know if you can see that in the reflection, but it looks pretty good already, but we're gonna step that up a notch. I'm gonna do the majority of this work using just a random orbit sander and a little bit of hand sanding. I'm gonna use some Velcro backed wet dry sandpaper. What I have here is a 2000 grit sandpaper, and that's all I'm gonna use for this, but you don't need to start with a 2000 grit. It's gonna take a long time if you have a lot of material to level out. Since I've already got this surface fairly smooth, I feel comfortable starting right out with a 2000 grit. And you've seen me use them before. I'm gonna use these SureBuff buffing pads to buff the top. These things are awesome. They go right on your random orbit sander and you can use them for stuff like this. You can polish your car, all kinds of stuff. If you guys are interested in these buffing pads, I will put a link in the video description, but just a quick heads up, sometimes these are hard to find and they tend to be out of stock, so it could be hit or miss. So if it doesn't seem to be in stock right now, check back again later. Chances are they'll be back in stock. We're gonna use a spray bottle with some ordinary tap water in it. Nothing special here, just tap water with a few drops of dish soap in there. That's gonna help lubricate everything once we start sanding. You're gonna need some sort of polish. I've had really good luck with this Meguiar's Ultimate Polishing Compound. Not sponsored or anything by them, but it does work well and I've had good luck with it. So that's what I'm gonna use for this one. Now, before I do any sanding, I'm gonna take my random orbit sander outside, blow it out completely with an air hose and get it as clean as possible. The reason that I like to do that is because I don't want any sawdust or other sanding debris to drop out of the sander and get underneath the sandpaper and cause me some weird swirls or scratches in the finish. I wanna try to keep this as clean as possible. You'll notice that this sandpaper has no holes for dust collection, and that's okay. We're gonna be using water. We don't want that water to get sucked up in the sander. Now, sometimes people ask, aren't you gonna have trouble with water in your sander? I have never had any issues. I've used this particular sander to do this job several times, and we're not soaking the thing in a tub of water or anything like that. We're going to use a few squirts from a spray bottle. Before we put any sandpaper to this, a couple of things that you need to make sure. You need to make sure your finish is completely 100% cured. You don't want it to still be soft and drying. A good way to tell if it's dry and cured is the smell test. If you can still smell fumes coming off of there, that's a pretty good indicator that the finish has still off-gassing and is not quite completely cured yet. So if you can still smell it, don't start polishing yet. Wait till there's no smell at all. This one I know right now is 100% cured and ready to polish, so let's come on in a little bit closer and I'll show you what we're gonna do. First, I'll wet the surface lightly with the spray bottle. Then we can just begin sanding. There's really not a whole lot of difference between wet sanding like this and sanding something with normal sandpaper. You want to keep the sander moving and not sit in one spot for too long. Just after a minute or so of sanding, you can already start to see that there's still some low spots in there. Those are the areas we want to keep sanding until everything is nice and even and uniform. We want to get rid of all the shiny spots because right now those are the low spots. That's looking better. Move on to the back. Same process. Now with the front and back nice and level, it's time to sand the sides. Now you could get a little bit with the random orbit sander, but it's really hard to get into all the spaces because of the curves and contours. So really the best way I've found is just to do it by hand. Here I have my 2000 grit paper wrapped around a rubber sanding block. The rubber block does a great job conforming to the curves and doesn't leave me with any really hard edges on the sandpaper. Alright, so now after a lot of hand sanding, I think the sides are nice and smooth and we are ready to move on with the polishing. To be completely honest with you guys, I probably should have used something like 1000 grit for the sides and then go to a 2000 grit, but I didn't have any on hand, so it took a really long time using just 2000 grit on the ends. It's something I got to keep in mind for next time. Make sure I have a little bit coarser grit on hand. When you're going to be hand sanding, it does take a fair amount of work. But nonetheless, let's get this thing polished. We'll just grab one of our SureBuff pads. We'll slap that guy right on our sander. We'll grab our polish and shake well before using it. Now I'll apply some of the polish to the body, and then using the buffing pad, I'll lightly smear it around. This does two things. First, it evenly coats the body, but I think an even better reason is it helps to reduce the amount of splatter that flies all over you when you turn on the sander. Much like wet sanding, it's important to keep the sander moving. Don't ever stop in one spot or you really risk burning through the finish. Another area you have to be a little cautious on is on the edges. No matter how evenly you spray your finish on, the edges always have a little bit less material, so you have to be careful you don't burn through the finish or along the corners. Before too long, you'll start to see the shine coming in under the sander. That's usually when I stop and finish by hand with a nice soft towel or cloth. Look at that. That looks nice. Now we'll repeat that process on the front. Of course, you don't want to forget the sides. Now, a lot of the sides you can get pretty good with the polisher, and I definitely do that as opposed to hand polishing. There are just a couple spots around the edges that I'm going to have to bring in the shine by hand, just because I can't get in there. It takes a little work at this stage, but it's okay. There are different buffing attachments that you could probably use to get this part done. I just haven't found that it's really that big of a deal. I may try something at some point, but right now, a little bit of elbow grease never hurt nobody. Now is also a good time to check all around the rest of the edge. Make sure you didn't miss anything. If there's an area that could use just a little more work, now's the time to do it. Well, there it is, guys. Hopefully you can get an idea of the shine that's on this body. I think it looks really good, and now I need to move on and get this thing put together. So I hope that gives you some ideas as to how you can accomplish a nice shine like this. Maybe if you don't have a real fancy buffer, maybe just have a random orbit sander, get you some of these SureBuff buffing pads, some good buffing compound, a little bit of elbow grease, and you can get this done. So thanks a lot for watching this video, guys. I hope you enjoyed it and found it useful. Let me know down below in the comments what you think of this finish. Also, let me know if there are other topics of guitar building that you'd like me to cover a little bit more. Thanks a lot for watching, guys, and we'll see you next time.